I divorced my wife after she confessed this in therapy. My wife and I have been married for about 12 years now. Our marriage has been the best thing that has ever happened to me since I lost my parents. My parents and I were pretty close while I was growing up. I was the first and only child my parents had, and I think that kind of contributed to our closeness. My mom would often take me to parks during the weekends, and we would have such fun that only she could provide. She would get me everything I needed, and the only time she got angry with me was when I didn't do what I was supposed to. That didn't happen often, also because my mom and I had this kind of bond, and I hated making her angry or mad at me. My dad was not as present in my childhood as my mom was. The reason was because he was a journalist and his job required him traveling from one place to the other. Sometimes I wouldn't see him for about 6 months. But the good thing was that whenever he was home, we spent such quality time together, and that accounted for his absence. He would always take my mom and I to places we loved, and we would spend time telling each other stories. My parents told me stories about how they met and some of the mischief they did while younger. I enjoyed listening to them because it was fun imagining how they would have been. While they were possibly my age, it was safe to say that my parents were literally my best friends. I was an introvert while growing up, and it was quite difficult for me to have friends early. During those periods, I couldn't talk to anyone at school. My parents were my go-to. Once I returned from school, I would tell my mom all about my day, what teachers were nice to me, who did something to annoy a teacher who didn't do their assignment, and other things like that. When there was a new boy at school, I told my parents about him. There was something about this new boy that sparked curiosity in me. I wanted to know more about him immediately when I saw him. I told my parents about this and asked whether it was normal or not. They assured me that nothing was wrong, and Jason would go on to be my best friend in years to come. Such was the kind of cordial relationship that existed between my parents and me. But as it is said, good people and things do not last forever. While I was in high school, I lost my dad to a plane crash. He had been on his way to cover the news, but the plane had suddenly developed some kind of fault midway in the air. Long story short, my dad was gone. I cannot begin to recount how pained I felt when this happened. My mom became a shadow of herself. She was no longer the happy mom I grew up knowing. She couldn't eat as much and it wasn't too long before she also passed away. As the years passed after my parents' death, my relationship with Jason became stronger. He knew literally everything about me and I also knew things about him. Sometimes I would go over to his house when I got tired of living with my aunt. His parents were very receptive to me and accommodated me for every time I went over. In no time, I became the other son they never had. I moved from spending the weekend with them to moving over to their place. My aunt met them as well and she was comfortable with my staying with them. Jason and I went to the same university and we promised that we would get married on the same day. Now that I look back to those times, I cannot help but laugh at how we thought everything in life would go according to our plans. After we graduated, our paths started getting separated. Jason went into the publishing house while I went into journalism. Truthfully, my dad had always encouraged me and made journalism enviable. I had made the decision since I was younger that I was eventually going into the field of journalism. Things went well for Jason and Jason had always been one who worked hard. You could commit anything into his hands and rest assured that nothing wrong would go on. That was just the way Jason was. And this was the same way he treated his work. In no time, he became a favorite of his boss. He got himself a good apartment and a very good car in 2 years of working at the place. My workplace wasn't bad either. I met my wife, Jenny, in my second year at work. Of course, it was during a seminar I had attended. It was a workshop for journalists, and my boss had insisted that I attend the workshop. Jenny had been one of the facilitators and really enjoyed the way she taught. She simplified everything, and in no time everyone was able to get the gist of what she had in mind. I didn't think that our paths would cross after that time, but I guess the universe has its own way of connecting people. I saw Jenny some months after the workshop, and surprisingly, she recognized me. What started as an official conversation would later graduate into what in later years would lead to our marriage. Before we got married, we dated for some months. During this period, I got to know that Jenny wasn't in my field, unlike my previous thought. In fact, I discovered that she was a vet doctor. I had been seeing some signs that she was the type who was really crazy about animals. Her phone wallpaper was a cute picture of her holding 2 puppies. The picture on most of her profile on her socials were either the picture of a dog or a cat, or she at some zoo. I had always wanted to ask what her obsessions with animals was about, but I kept forgetting. That was until one day when we went out on a date. As usual, instead of going to a restaurant and enjoying the cool of the evening, I suggested we take a walk. It was a very fair, weathered evening and I thought it wouldn't be a bad idea just walking, talking, and taking in cool air while we walked. A woman was walking her dog down and it seemed pretty angry. It wouldn't move and only kept barking. Jenny saw the woman and immediately went to the dog. I watched her and waited for her next move. The dog barked at her first, but she stooped and it surprisingly went quiet. She then played with its fur and the dog began shaking its tail. The owner of the dog could only look in amazement. After the woman left, I asked her how she was able to calm the angry dog and what her obsession with animals was. She laughed initially and told me that it was what she enjoyed doing. I wasn't so clear on what she meant and asked her to explain properly. Then she told me that she was a vet doctor, and caring for animals was basically what she did. It then made sense to me why she had a lot of animals around her. I asked why she had spoken at the conference, and she told me that she had been invited. Fast forward to when we got married. We didn't have any issues. In fact, my marriage was almost an exact replica of that of my parents. And I was grateful for that. My wife and I understood each other perfectly, and there was never a time we had some sort of misunderstanding that didn't get settled in about 10 minutes. In the 3rd year of our marriage, we had Jessie. She took after my wife. Her blue eyes, her blonde silk hair, her dimples, everything. The period of pregnancy was one of the toughest times in our marriage. My wife became very irritable. It took a lot of enduring on my end, and I understood that it wasn't her fault. But Jessie made us forget all of those times because she was the cutest child I could have ever prayed to have. We had our 2nd child, John, 3 years later. The pregnancy period was a lot better for the both of us. I think it's because it was not the first time. Jessie was so pleased to have a brother. Each day she would go to his cot and stare at him until she fell asleep. Sometimes she would tell him things we didn't understand, or even sing to him with her tiny voice. My wife and I got emotional sometimes watching the kind of bond that existed between both our kids. Neither I nor my wife had siblings while growing up, so suffice it to say that sometimes we got jealous. But we're also happy that they had each other for themselves. My family was very happy. The kids grew well and excelled at school. Jenny excelled more at the arts. She enjoyed spelling things out and writing everything she could. John, on the other hand, had a knack for dismantling every toy we got him. He would find a way to pull out the tires of the truck we got him. And one after the other until the internal structure of the toy could be seen. My wife and I didn't need any more signs to know their possible career paths. Everything moved on fine with my wife and me. At my workplace, I got promoted, and things were going pretty well with me. I hadn't heard so much from Jason because he had to relocate because of work. I was home one Sunday evening after church when I got a text from him. He told me that he was back in town. Something about the way he texted made me unsettled. I immediately asked how he was, and he texted 3 words, "I need help." I drove to his home and I didn't see him in a good mood. He told me that things had gone really bad for him in terms of work. He got demoted and couldn't afford living where he was at, so he had to come back. I didn't bother asking for details. I knew that Jason was hardworking, and if something had happened, it would have probably been due to a mistake or something of that nature. I tried talking to him and assured him that he could still get a job. My wife and I thought things were better with him, but 2 months later he had deteriorated to a dangerous state. My wife suggested therapy for him because his mental state was pretty bad. I registered him for therapy against his wish. He kept on insisting he was fine, but I knew that was far from the truth. He finally agreed to go for therapy after I told him the amount I had spent on it already. Therapy was never cheap, and he only went because he didn't want me to waste good money on someone who didn't work for it. The healing process for Jason was painfully slow. Sometimes I had to stay with him during the weekend with my kids. He loved seeing Jessie and John. They always made him smile. It was the only time he smiled genuinely. Sometimes we would take long walks with the kids, Jason, my wife, and me. just so he could feel better. We continued this routine for 2 years before we saw Jason coming out of a shell once again. With the whole Jason episode gone, all I wanted was to enjoy my family and spend quality time with Jason as well. But then something happened that I wouldn't have ever seen coming. It was my wife, Jenny. She began to complain of extreme stress. I understood her point because she was a vet doctor and she did basically all of the main tasks. Her employees only assisted her, but the bulk of the work was on her. I suggested she take a break, but she said she couldn't because so many animals would have been dead because of her unavailability. I tried making her realize that her health was about most importance. But that didn't work. I suggested therapy for her, too, and she agreed. She went for therapy for about 6 months, and I could see visible changes. She told me that it helped relieve her stress and that it was something she would like to do with me. I told her how I felt about therapies, and she understood. But some weeks later, she just wouldn't stop talking about how great it would be to have a couple therapy. Eventually I agreed to go with her, even though I still didn't feel the need for it. The first 2 therapy sessions went well. The therapist was able to nail down an important aspect of my wife. She distrusted humans generally. I knew not because she told me, but because I was very observant. She told me that while growing, she trusted her dad with everything. He was the only parent she had because her mom had left them a long time ago. Then one day, her dad got back from work and was in a bad mood. Coincidentally, her dog wouldn't stop barking because they had been playing together before her dad came, and she was still excited. Long story short, her dad took the dog out of the house and never returned with it. When she asked where Lucy was, he said he had sold her because he needed some peace and quiet. Her dad knew what the dog meant to her since she had no siblings, but still went ahead to sell her. She had an eating disorder the following week and since then had made up her mind to be a vet doctor and never to trust people too much so as not to get her heart broken. But this happened so many years ago and she was now a grown-up with so many responsibilities. She had the kids to take care of and she appeared to be relatively adjusted and a good mom to both of our kids. The therapist asked us for homework to do the Big 5 personality test. It was a long questionnaire and we shared it with him. My trust of others was a 34 and hers was an 8, which is very low. He asked her to tell him what makes her distrust people. She said people were very two-faced and only do what benefited them and she felt like she has a disadvantage in life because of her morals. My wife is very kind to people and I considered it weird because she doesn't trust them at all. She helps people a lot and one of her friends even said she's the one they go to for advice because they know she wants the best for them and can keep a secret. She does a lot of unpaid work to help stray animals and is often depressed if an animal passes away. But she says she does it because she feels extreme guilt if she doesn't help others. But she feels people don't feel guilt hurting her, which is why she prefers animals to humans. Then the topic of our marriage and trust came up and she was super tight-lipped about it at first, but then admitted she didn't trust me all that much. She said she actually married me because I was honest and being kind of in it for myself. She said she can't stand people who appear kind and compassionate and then lie and backstab people, and prefers an honest person. I was shocked because I feel like I'm an honest but also kind and generous person, but in her eyes I'm not. But she says it's fine because I'm honest about it. She also admitted she took out the insickness and in-health part of our nuptials because she felt like I would divorce her if she got cancer, but she was okay with that because it would unalive her to expect it and then be disappointed. But she felt like she knew where she stood with me. The therapist was as confused as I was after she made these utterances. I wondered why she was only saying such and how long she intended to hide the truth from me, considering that we had been married for over 12 years. The therapist then asked her whether she loved me or not. Her response was another shock to me. She told the therapist that she didn't know, but she thinks so. I've been thinking about her words and it bothers me so much. I asked her out of therapy why she even married me, and she said she knew I was hard-working and honest, and most people are not kind, but that they fake kindness to get ahead. She liked that I didn't, and she felt like she really understood me, so she felt safe with me. I told her if she didn't think I was a good person, but just an honest one, we should just divorce. And she got mad and told me our marriage was good. We are working together well and raising our kids, and there wasn't anything serious to me. I just realized my wife didn't think I was a good person and I feel like our marriage has been a lie. I spoke to Jason about it and he told me it would be better to get a divorce. My wife was apparently not going to change because she had lived with me for so long and her perspective still hadn't changed. Even though I like my wife, I saw sense in what he told me. I have decided to go on with a divorce. I don't know how the kids would react to it, but it is the best choice. I don't think I can continue to live with someone who didn't think I was a good person.